Hi, I'm Stewart Spinks and welcome to episode 299 of my podcast, Beekeeping Short and Sweet. Well, it looks like the weather might finally be turning a little warmer. It's not too different from last year with the late start, but now it's here, let's crack on. It's a good time to perform a Bailey comb change. Beekeeping Short and Sweet, a beekeeping podcast for the inquisitive beekeeper with a short attention span. A beekeeper, in fact, just like me. Today's podcast is sponsored in part by Healthy Bees, Heavy Hives, a new book on beekeeping today with a focus on helping you maximise your yields and, hopefully, increasing profitability in beekeeping, featuring clear diagrams and beautiful photographs that complement a relaxed and humorous writing style which is both enjoyable and informative to read. Available now at Northern Bee Books, Amazon and all good bookstores both online and in your high street. You'll find links in today's podcast notes. Hi everyone, welcome back to the podcast. Another week passes and another week of not really any beekeeping to be had. This cold weather is turning into the same scenario as we had last year, where we really didn't get started with regular weekly inspections until May. And here we are, the last weekend in April, and still we struggle to find any meaningful breaks in the cooler weather to allow any kind of decent inspections of more than a couple of colonies at a time. We did have that very limited period of slightly brighter weather a couple of weeks ago, and thank goodness for it. We were able to check pretty much every colony, and of those we checked, maybe a dozen were throwing up queen cells, so we'll need to be all over those colonies next week as the weather begins to turn a little warmer, I hope. At least that's what the current forecast is predicting. We've had highs of around 9 or 10 degrees Celsius this past week. Not great for inspecting colonies at all, especially as it's been accompanied with high winds and rain showers. Next week, however, looks more like 15, 16 or even 18 degrees Celsius. And that means in the sheltered spots it will feel more like 20 degrees Celsius or even more. Now that's much better for beekeeping. Something I expect to see are chewed down queen cells. It's a regular sight in colonies, particularly at this time of year. Colonies get that reproductive urge and start building queen cells on which they will swarm. And then the weather turns distinctly wintry again, and they abandon the idea of swarming completely. Not wanting to have multiple virgin queens emerging and wandering around the colony causing havoc, the workers chew a hole in the side of the queen cell and kill the developing queen inside. What you find is a queen cell with a telltale hole midway up the side of the capped queen cell, but otherwise empty. A sure sign the beekeeper got lucky and the colony abandoned the attempted swarm. If you've discovered this type of queen cell as you've grabbed a hive tool and carried out a quick weekend inspection, then count yourself lucky and check for more queen cells. They'll soon be at it again, immediately they feel the weather changing for the better. If, like me, you have colonies on a spring crop such as oilseed rape, you might be worrying that you're not going to get a crop of honey at all off them because it's been too cold. I've never found this to be true. In fact, I kind of like the late nectar flow from the oilseed rape rather than that early flush we get just as the crop starts to flower. I've seen it again this year. The supers we've added to some colonies had a little honey in them, but nothing to really shout about. I suspect they may be eating it as fast as they've been collecting it in order to keep warm. Brood nests, however, have grown significantly, and with all of that worker brood emerging, the workforce is suddenly much larger than it has been in previous weeks, meaning far more bees can get out to forage. This means, if you time it right, a little after midday maybe, you'll see hundreds if not thousands of worker honeybees emerging from the hive, turning to face the entrance and begin the process of orientation flights. It's another one of those little hive miracles that we're lucky enough to witness each season. Don't worry if you see lots and lots of bees coming out of the hive. It's not a swarm, just lots of workers excited to finally get out of the hive and start discovering the wider world they live in. Now, for those of you of a certain age who remember Michael Fish, the BBC weather forecaster, who famously said in 1987, and I quote, "Earlier on today, apparently, a woman rang the BBC and said she heard there was a hurricane on the way. Well, if you're watching, don't worry, there isn't." Well, I'm just going to clarify my previous comment. If you see a large cloud of bees coming out of your hive and they don't turn around and face the hive as if they're trying to work out where they are, but rather they come out and just start flying around in the air, then I'm sorry, that cloud of bees is a swarm. Now, there's no point in running around at that point trying to catch them all in a butterfly net. Not that any of you would do such a thing, but just let them settle in a tree or bush for a while, and then you can collect them far more easily. If you have a clipped queen, then likely as not they'll all end up going back into the hive anyway. I've kind of jumped around here a little. The point I was making earlier is that there's still a decent amount of oilseed rape nectar to come in, and that will happen in the next couple of weeks. I guarantee it. Well, almost. Warmer weather, oilseed rape plants getting near the end of their flowering period, and a rush of nectar from fewer and fewer flowers all adds up to a collecting frenzy of sorts. Just make sure you have a super or two on your hive if you want a crop, and the bees will do the rest. This all works well for me, as those colonies we wanted to see grow larger to enable us to split had a second brood box placed on top of the original brood box about 10 to 14 days ago now. I really wouldn't be at all surprised if these have been drawn out fully and have lots of eggs and brood in them. If so, these colonies will have a queen excluder and supers added early next week. 2 drawn supers, or possibly 3 depending on the size of the colony, and I fully expect them to get filled with oilseed rape honey over the next fortnight. If we're heading for warmer weather, it's an ideal time to add a second brood box in any form of Bailey comb change kind of process. The name Bailey comb change refers to a technique devised by a beekeeper called Leslie Bailey, and comb changing of any kind is really useful as we head into late spring and early summer. It removes a huge amount of disease and pests, while at the same time enabling us to remove any old dirty combs that are well past their best before dates. It's good practice to replace comb on a regular basis. It keeps the number of available cells in a colony at the maximum level, and as I said, it removes pests and disease, all helpful stuff for our bees. A Bailey comb change enables us to remove all of the frames at once, rather than swapping out a few frames each year. It removes all the comb, and with it those nasty viruses and pests. If you can combine this with replacing the floor, brood box and crown board in what I call a spring clean, then the colony has the perfect setup for the coming summer. A Bailey board is basically an eek with an entrance cut into it and a queen excluder pinned to the top. As with most beekeeping processes or techniques, there are always various ways of approaching the method, but here's one for those who find it hard to find their queen. Let's assume we have a colony on a single brood box with lots of old grubby frames that really should have been changed out a year or two ago. It's late April, as it is, and the weather is warming up a little at last. Keeping things simple, I would just add another brood box filled with foundation above the old brood box. So we have a hive stand, a floor, the old brood box, and on top of this, the clean brood box filled with frames of foundation. Now, if there's a really good nectar flow, you could get away with simply adding the crown board and roof and leaving them for a week. But why not help them out by adding either a rapid feeder of some sort, a bucket feeder, a frame feeder, or one of those jumbo green feeders that Maysmore apiaries sell? Any kind of feeder is fine. You could even replace the chrome board and add a giant lump of fondant on top of it. Replace the roof and leave them for a week or so. When you go back, the worker bees will have moved up into the top brood box and will have started drawing new comb on the foundation that you've provided for them. At this point, you ideally want to find the queen. Here's how, and remember, it's easier if she's marked and you have a spare pair of eyes looking at the frames with you. Remove the roof and place it upturned on the ground in front of your hive entrance. Don't remove the chrome board, and if you have a feeder on top, remove this carefully so as not to spill any syrup you might still have in it. Prise the top brood box off the bottom brood box using your hive tool, remember with the chrome board still on top of it. This keeps the bees within nice and calm, and if the queen is in the top box, which we hope, she won't be startled by the sunshine and dive back down into the bottom box. Place this new brood box on top of the roof so that it sits on top, not inside the roof. This also helps keep the queen in the brood box rather than allowing her to run down onto the upturned roof, ready to go missing when you put it all back together again. Now remove the chrome board and, using as little smoke as possible, start to inspect each frame. The outside frames will likely still be foundation, so you can quickly scan through those and move on. As soon as you find drawn comb, start looking for eggs and young larvae. If you see some, start looking more closely for the queen. Work your way through the box until you find the queen. Then reassemble the box with all the frames tightly pushed together. This is important because as they draw out the new comb, you don't want to leave odd spacing for them to build comb into. Keep it neat and tidy now, and you'll benefit by it for the rest of the season. Once the frames are all back in the brood box, replace the chrome board and move on to the bottom older brood box. Work through it, checking for frames of brood. Any frames that don't hold brood can be removed and have dummy boards inserted instead, or if you don't have a ready supply of dummy boards, anything that will fill the void would be fine. We've used old bits of carpet, polystyrene packing offcuts, foam blocks, an old sheet in fact. They all work. You're just looking to stop the bees from building a heap of brace or burr comb and reduce the area they have in the bottom box to store anything, thus forcing them upwards into the new brood box. Once you've completed this part of the inspection and you've successfully found your queen in the top box, add a queen excluder or Bailey board if you have one or are able to make one. Block the bottom entrance and replace the clean second brood box on top of the queen excluder or Bailey board. Replace and top up feeders and replace the roof. The following week you should be getting close to being able to remove the bottom box entirely. Any brood that was in there will have emerged or be very close to emerging. But let's say the queen laid some eggs in there the week previously, before you put the queen excluder back in. Those eggs are going to be 3 weeks away from emerging, so in the second week of the process, you need to check back down in the bottom box and remove any frames that don't have any brood in them, as you did before. Fill the space left once more, and you're starting to drive all of the bees up into the top box, where the new comb will be drawn all the more quickly. Once you find there's no more brood in the bottom box, you can carry out one final inspection, and while you do this you can replace all of the dirty equipment. So, roof on the floor once more, top brood box lifted down onto the roof. Be careful as this box will be getting heavier day by day. Remove the Bailey board or queen excluder, whichever you've used. Remove the bottom brood box and floor. Replace the floor with a nice shiny clean one. Lift the new brood box back onto the new floor and inspect that box. You should by now have a nearly fully drawn set of frames. If so, remove the feeder. If it's a frame feeder, replace it with a new frame of foundation. Add a clean chrome board and replace the roof. Congratulations, you've now completed a Bailey comb change. But what if you can't find your queen? Well, I would go with the process as I've described, but instead of adding a Bailey board or queen excluder, I'd simply remove frames from the bottom box that don't have any brood in them, replacing them with dummy boards or, again, anything to fill that void. Keep doing this until you have no brood in the bottom box, and then rebuild the hive as I've described, shaking all of the bees off anything from the bottom box, be it frames, dummy boards, old rags, or whatever you've used to fill those voids. Brush bees from the sides of the dirty brood box, replace the floor with a clean one, and rebuild. The chances are you've just not seen the queen, and she's happily laying eggs in the top box. What I'll do is shoot a couple of videos showing just how this all works, so look out for those. It's simple and very effective at removing high loads of pests and disease from your colony, while at the same time allowing all of the brood to emerge and not be lost. One final thought. If you believe you have a large population of Varroa, then this technique is not the one to use. For high Varroa numbers and using a mechanical method of removal, I would use a shook swarm, and I'll go over that next week perhaps. Well, that's it for this week. Don't forget to check out my website www.norfolk-honey.co.uk, and for my latest videos and podcasts with more updates, tips and techniques, it's the same Patreon page, www.patreon.com/Norfolk Honey. And remember, I'm Stewart Spinks, and that was Beekeeping Short and Sweet.